The relentless Chicago rain pounded against the pavement, soaking Chloe to the bone as she rushed toward the luxury apartment building. In her arms, she clutched a brown paper bag filled with expensive steaks, fresh asparagus, and a bottle of red wine. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a quiet, romantic dinner to show Julian just how much he meant to her. Her heart hammered with excited anticipation as she rode the elevator to the penthouse, a bright smile lighting up her damp face. She did not even bother to knock, using the spare key he had given her just days before. But as the heavy oak door swung open, the smile froze on her lips. The bag of groceries slipped from her trembling hands, the glass bottle shattering loudly against the hardwood floor. Red wine pooled around her shoes like blood. Standing in the hallway, wrapped only in a white bath towel, was the one woman who was never supposed to be there. The nightmare had become reality. Chloe's life had always been a battle between duty and desire. Her fondest memories belonged to an old Indiana farm, where she sat beneath a massive oak tree, eating Grandma Betty's legendary blueberry pancakes. The smell of melting butter and maple syrup was her definition of love. She dreamed of going to culinary school, of creating magic with a skillet and fire. But her mother, Sarah, an ambitious corporate lawyer, crushed those dreams, forcing Chloe into a sensible psychology degree. Stifled and stressed, Chloe found comfort in food. Her weight spiraled, and so did her self-esteem. She tried everything to fit society's mold, even falling for a charismatic gym trainer named Chad, who promised her a wellness transformation. Instead, he shattered her confidence by cheating on her with a fitness influencer. Broken and exhausted, Chloe retreated into herself, hiding her curves under oversized sweaters and accepting a mundane job as a counselor at a community center. She stopped believing in fairy tales. She stopped believing she deserved to be looked at with admiration. But a random evening on a dating app was about to introduce her to a man hiding scars far deeper than her own. The glow of the smartphone screen was the only light in Chloe's cramped apartment. Outside, the relentless city wind howled, rattling the single-pane window. She swiped listlessly on the dating app, a mindless repetition to numb the lingering ache of her past. Chad had destroyed her confidence, leaving her terrified of mirrors and men. Her thumb paused over a profile. The name was Julian. His smile was effortless, his eyes holding a depth that seemed to reach through the digital void. There were no shirtless gym selfies, no arrogant quotes, just a man with a golden retriever and a backdrop of autumn leaves. For weeks they messaged constantly. He did not ask for late-night photos or rush her into anything. They talked about the smell of old bookstores, the melancholic beauty of jazz, and the subtle art of a perfectly brewed coffee. Chloe felt a spark, a dangerous, fragile ember of hope. She had carefully edited her profile photos, trimming away the physical weight she carried like a heavy shield. When Julian finally asked her to meet by the Buckingham Fountain, her heart hammered wildly against her ribs. She spent hours curling her hair, applying layers of foundation, and squeezing into a shapewear dress that restricted her breathing. She wanted to be the girl in the photos, the girl worthy of a man who quoted poetry. As she walked toward the park, the summer heat pressed down heavily on her shoulders. Her heels clicked nervously on the pavement as she approached the fountain. The park was mostly empty, the water dancing gracefully in the golden hour light. She was terrified he would take one look at her and walk away. She scanned the empty benches, her anxiety peaking. Then she heard her name. She turned, expecting a towering athlete, but her breath hitched. Julian was there, holding a bouquet of red roses, but he was seated in a sleek, modern wheelchair. He looked exactly like his photos, devastatingly handsome, but the reality of his situation hit her like a physical blow. Her cheeks flushed hot with immediate guilt. She had been so consumed by her own insecurities, terrified he would judge her slightly edited photos, that she had completely missed the possibility that he was hiding something too. Julian offered a nervous, self-deprecating smile, holding out the roses. He explained that he lacked the courage to mention the chair, afraid she would pity him or swipe left. Chloe took the flowers, their velvet petals soft against her trembling fingers. All her insecurities suddenly felt incredibly trivial. She looked down at him, realizing that vulnerability was a two-way street. Without hesitation, she smiled warmly and suggested they grab a coffee. As they moved down the paved path together, the heavy weight of expectations began to lift from her chest. They settled into a quiet corner booth at a rustic coffee shop, the scent of roasted beans filling the air. Julian wrapped his long fingers around a steaming mug and finally told her the truth. He came from a wealthy Chicago family, destined for corporate greatness until he fell blindly in love with a woman named Audrey. Audrey was reckless and wild. One night, after a party, she begged to drive his sports car. Julian, blinded by love, agreed. She took a corner too fast, wrapping the car around a concrete pillar. Audrey walked away without a scratch. Julian woke up in a hospital bed with a shattered spine, but the deepest betrayal came the next morning. Audrey had dragged his unconscious body into the driver's seat before the police arrived. She framed him to save herself. Julian, shattered and heartbroken, refused to tell the police the truth. He loved her too much to send her to prison, but Audrey never visited him again. She vanished, moving on to another wealthy man, leaving Julian to face his dark reality alone. Chloe listened in stunned silence, her heart breaking for the man sitting across from her. He was a tragic hero, protecting a villain who had destroyed his life. She saw the raw pain in his eyes and felt a sudden, fierce urge to protect him from the world. Julian stared at the wooden table, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. His wealthy parents were flying in from New York the next week. They had never met Audrey, but they knew he had stayed in Chicago for a woman. They demanded to meet the fiancée he had sacrificed everything for. Julian looked up at Chloe, his eyes pleading. He asked her to pretend to be his Audrey, just for one weekend, just to keep his overbearing parents from digging into the truth and discovering the pathetic reality of his betrayal. Chloe blinked, processing the sheer absurdity of the request. She was a counselor, a woman who analysed behaviour for a living, and this was a textbook disaster. But looking at Julian, she saw a kindred spirit. They were both broken people, hiding behind facades to survive. She thought about Chad, about the pain of being discarded, and she made a reckless decision. She agreed. She told him she did not want his money. She just wanted to help him survive the weekend. Julian let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. A genuine, radiant smile broke across his face, transforming him entirely. For the first time in years, Chloe felt like she mattered. She was not just a girl with a weight problem. She was someone's saviour. The dangerous game of pretend had officially begun. The following Saturday, Chloe stood in the opulent foyer of Julian's downtown penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the Chicago skyline, but the apartment itself felt like a sterile museum. Everything was glass, steel, and cold leather. It was clear that a man lived here alone, trapped in his physical limitations and emotional grief. She was greeted by Mrs. Higgins, a stern, unsmiling housekeeper with eyes like a hawk. The older woman clearly disapproved of this sudden fiancé, analysing Chloe's simple dress and curvy figure with thin-lipped judgment. Julian rolled into the living room, looking nervous but devastatingly sharp in a tailored shirt. He introduced Chloe, his voice carrying a warmth that made her stomach flutter. Mrs. Higgins offered a stiff nod and retreated to the laundry room. Chloe looked around, rubbing her arms against the chill of the air conditioning. She realised Julian needed more than just a fake girlfriend. He needed warmth. He needed the feeling of a real home. She dropped her purse on the immaculate glass table and marched straight into the massive, unused kitchen. She threw open the stainless steel refrigerator, assessing the sparse ingredients. It was time to show Julian what real comfort felt like. She was going to cook. Chloe tied a linen apron over her dress and went to work. The sterile kitchen was soon transformed into a chaotic symphony of culinary creation. She found flour, butter, and heavy cream, and decided to make Grandma Betty's classic buttermilk biscuits and sausage gravy. Julian sat at the marble island, watching her in absolute fascination. He had never seen someone move with such joyful purpose. Flour dusted her cheek, and she hummed a soft jazz tune as she whisked the gravy to a perfect simmering thickness. The rich, savoury aroma drifted through the massive apartment, chasing away the cold, clinical smell of expensive cleaners. Even Mrs. Higgins poked her head out, her rigid posture softening as she caught the scent of real, homemade food. Chloe plated the steaming food and slid a plate in front of Julian. He took one bite and his eyes widened in sheer disbelief. He confessed he had never tasted anything so incredible in his entire life. Chloe laughed, a bright, genuine sound that bounced off the high ceilings. For a brief moment, they were not two broken people playing a desperate game. They were just a man and a woman, sharing a meal, sharing a moment of pure, unadulterated happiness. The walls between them began to slowly crumble, replaced by a quiet, simmering chemistry. The elevator chimed loudly, shattering their quiet moment. Julian's parents, Richard and Eleanor Vanderbilt, had arrived 2 hours early. Chloe barely had time to wipe the flour from her cheek before Julian rolled forward to greet them. Eleanor was a vision of New York high society draped in cashmere, while Richard carried the intimidating aura of a ruthless CEO. They stepped into the penthouse, their sharp eyes immediately locking onto Chloe. Julian swallowed hard and introduced her as Audrey. Eleanor raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, clearly surprised by Chloe's soft, approachable appearance. Richard crossed his arms, his gaze calculating and cold. But the tension in the room was suddenly broken by the undeniable smell of baking biscuits. Chloe, leaning into her role, warmly welcomed them and insisted they sit down for an impromptu brunch. Reluctantly, the wealthy couple took their seats at the dining table. Chloe served them with effortless grace. As Richard took his first bite, his stern expression faltered. Eleanor actually groaned in delight. The food was a revelation. Over coffee and biscuits, Chloe navigated their sharp questions with practiced ease, using her psychology background to read the room and disarm their suspicions. She played the part of a loving, devoted partner flawlessly. Julian watched her, utterly mesmerized. The weekend passed in a blur of forced smiles, expensive dinners, and carefully constructed lies. Chloe stayed close to Julian, her hand resting naturally on his shoulder, her laughter filling the empty spaces of the penthouse. By Sunday evening, Eleanor pulled Chloe aside in the hallway. The older woman's icy exterior had melted entirely. She took Chloe's hands, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and thanked her for bringing the light back into her son's eyes. Richard, too, shook her hand warmly before they boarded the elevator. When the doors finally closed, Julian let out a massive sigh of relief. He turned his wheelchair toward Chloe, a look of profound gratitude on his face. He offered to pay her, but Chloe immediately refused. She had enjoyed the weekend. She had enjoyed being with him. As she gathered her coat to leave, a heavy silence fell between them. The charade was over, but neither of them wanted it to end. Julian hesitated, then quietly asked if she would come back to see him. Not as Audrey, but as Chloe. A massive smile broke across her face. She promised she would return. Walking out into the cool Chicago night, Chloe realized her heart was no longer guarded. She was falling for him, rapidly and dangerously. The fake relationship had planted the seeds of a very real love. Chloe became a constant presence in Julian's life. She started visiting him after her grueling shifts at the community centre. She learned that his doctors had offered a glimmer of hope. The spinal damage was not entirely permanent, but the physical therapy was agonizing. Julian had given up out of depression. Chloe refused to let him surrender. Utilizing her connections, she brought in Dr. Evans, a brilliant but unorthodox physical therapist known for his brutal but effective methods. The sessions were held in Julian's living room. Chloe sat by his side every single day, holding his hand as he screamed in pain, wiping the sweat from his forehead. She cooked him nutrient-dense meals, forcing him to eat when the pain made him nauseous. She became his anchor, his strict coach, and his gentle comfort. Julian began to look at her not just with gratitude, but with intense, burning admiration. He saw her strength, her boundless empathy, and the quiet beauty she tried so hard to hide. For Chloe, the physical proximity was intoxicating. She loved the smell of his cologne, the rough texture of his hands, the way he laughed at her terrible jokes. They were dancing on the edge of a deep romance, but the ghost of his past still lingered in the shadows of the apartment. One crisp autumn afternoon, Chloe convinced Julian to take a stroll along the bustling Chicago Riverwalk. The sun was shining, reflecting off the glass skyscrapers. Julian was in high spirits, manoeuvring his chair with newfound strength. Chloe walked beside him, a hot coffee in her hand, feeling completely at peace. But the peace shattered in an instant. A woman with striking blonde hair and a designer coat walked past them, laughing loudly on the arm of an older, wealthy man. Julian froze, his face drained of all colour, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the wheels of his chair. It was the real Audrey, the ex who had ruined his life. Audrey paused, recognising Julian. She looked at his wheelchair with a mixture of shock and disgust, then quickly averted her eyes, dragging her new companion away without a single word. Julian sat there, breathing heavily, completely paralysed by the traumatic encounter. Chloe watched the panic overtake him. She dropped her coffee, the hot liquid splashing on the concrete, and knelt in front of him. She grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. She spoke softly, grounding him, reminding him that he was safe, that he was moving forward, and that Audrey was nothing but a ghost. Slowly, Julian's breathing levelled. He looked deeply into Chloe's eyes, realising exactly who truly mattered. Months of agonising therapy finally culminated in a miracle. It was a quiet Tuesday evening in the penthouse. Dr. Evans stood back, crossing his arms. Julian sat at the edge of his wheelchair, his jaw set in fierce determination. Chloe stood a few feet away, her hands pressed tightly to her mouth. With a guttural groan, Julian planted his feet on the hardwood floor. His arms shook violently as he pushed himself up. The room held its breath. Slowly, agonisingly, his knees locked. He was standing. He swayed slightly, but he held his balance. Tears streamed freely down Chloe's cheeks. Julian looked up, his chest heaving, and his eyes locked onto hers. He did not look at the doctor. He only looked at the woman who had dragged him out of the darkness. He took one trembling, miraculous step toward her. Chloe rushed forward, catching him as his strength finally gave out. They collapsed onto the thick rug, holding each other tightly. Julian buried his face in her neck, crying silently. Chloe stroked his hair, her heart overflowing with a love so profound it terrified her. He pulled back slightly, his face inches from hers. He whispered her name, his voice thick with emotion. Their lips almost brushed. The air crackled with undeniable electricity, but the moment was interrupted by the sudden ringing of his phone. The kiss remained a breathless promise. The next evening, the sky opened up, pouring heavy rain over the city. Chloe practically floated through the aisles of the upscale grocery store. Julian had texted her, asking her to come over for a special dinner to celebrate his progress. He promised he had something important to tell her. Chloe's heart soared. This was it. He was finally going to confess his feelings. She bought prime rib steaks, expensive truffle butter, and a bottle of vintage Cabernet. She spent an hour getting ready, wearing a beautiful emerald green dress that accentuated her curves, her hair falling in soft waves. She wanted to look perfect for the man who had stolen her heart. She rode the subway, ignoring the damp chill of the evening. When she arrived at his building, the doorman smiled warmly and waved her through. She rode the elevator to the penthouse, her stomach doing nervous flips. She clutched the wet paper bag tightly, imagining Julian's smile when she walked in. She used her spare key, pushing the heavy door open, with a joyful greeting on her lips, but the words died in her throat. The scene before her was not a romantic setup. It was a brutal, merciless destruction of everything she had built over the last year. The bag slipped from her fingers, crashing to the floor. Standing in the centre of the hallway, her wet hair clinging to her shoulders, was Audrey. She was wearing nothing but one of Julian's white bath towels, a smug, triumphant smile plastered across her perfect face. The air in the apartment smelled of expensive perfume and betrayal. Audrey tilted her head, looking Chloe up and down with mocking pity. She laughed, a sharp, cruel sound, and asked what the delivery girl was doing with the key. Chloe could not breathe. The walls of the penthouse seemed to close in on her. The steaks and the shattered wine bottle lay at her feet, in a ruined mess. Julian's voice called out from the bedroom, asking who was at the door. That was all it took. The illusion shattered. Julian had played her. He had used her to heal, only to run back into the arms of the woman who had destroyed him. A suffocating wave of humiliation and grief washed over Chloe. She did not scream. She did not demand answers. She simply turned on her heel and fled. She ran out of the apartment, ignoring the elevator, and sprinted down the emergency stairwell. Her chest burned, tears blinding her vision, as she burst out into the pouring Chicago rain. She ran until her lungs gave out, the freezing water mixing with her bitter, unstoppable tears. Chloe sat on a cold plastic bench at the subway station, shivering violently in her soaked green dress. People walked past, casting pitiful glances at the weeping woman, but she did not care. Her soul felt entirely hollowed out. She had broken her own cardinal rule. She had opened her heart to a man, trusted him completely, and he had thrown her away the second his glamorous, toxic ex returned. The psychological tools she taught her clients felt utterly useless. There was no rationalizing this pain. She pulled out her phone, her fingers numb from the cold, and blocked Julian's number. She blocked his email. She deleted every photo, every message, erasing him from her digital existence. By the time the train arrived, her tears had dried, leaving behind a cold, hard shell of resolve. She would never let a man make a fool of her again. The next morning, she walked into the community centre and handed in her resignation. She packed her meagre belongings from her apartment. She needed to disappear. She needed to sever every tie to the city that had broken her. But life has a cruel sense of irony. 3 weeks later, in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, Chloe woke up and rushed to the bathroom, vomiting violently into the sink. The truth hit her with terrifying clarity. She was pregnant. Panic consumed her. A baby. Julian's baby. The child of a man who had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Chloe spent 3 days locked in her motel room, staring at the peeling wallpaper, trapped in a paralyzing storm of anxiety. She had no job, no permanent home, and a broken heart. How could she bring a child into this mess? She made the agonizing decision to visit a women's clinic. She sat in the sterile waiting room, a clipboard on her lap, her hands trembling so hard she could barely hold the pen. The fluorescent lights buzzed aggressively overhead. Just as she was about to sign the consent forms, a sharp, familiar voice called her name. It was Aunt Martha. Martha, a senior nurse practitioner at the clinic, stood in the hallway with wide, shocked eyes. She marched over, practically dragging Chloe into an empty examination room. Chloe broke down, sobbing uncontrollably as she confessed everything. The betrayal, the flight, the terrifying reality of her situation. Aunt Martha listened, her face softening with deep empathy. She wrapped her arms around her niece, holding her tight. She told Chloe a painful secret of her own. She had made the same choice decades ago and regretted it every single day. She looked Chloe in the eye and offered her a lifeline. "Come live with me," she demanded firmly. "We will raise this child together." Moving into Aunt Martha's cozy suburban home was a blessing, but the peace was short-lived. A week later, Chloe's mother, Sarah, arrived like a hurricane. Sarah paced the living room, her designer heels clicking furiously against the hardwood floor. She yelled about ruined careers, societal judgment, and the absolute disgrace of becoming a single mother. She demanded Chloe return to her psychology career immediately and fix this mistake. But Chloe, fueled by protective maternal instincts, stood her ground. For the first time in her life, she yelled back. She told her mother that her life was not a corporate project to be managed. She was going to have this baby, and if Sarah could not accept it, she knew where the door was. The fierce confrontation left Sarah stunned into silence. Slowly, the ambitious lawyer crumbled. She sat on the sofa, burying her face in her hands, and wept. The three women, despite their fiery differences, eventually huddled together. They realized that in moments of true crisis, family was the only thing that remained standing. Sarah apologized, promising to support her daughter no matter what. Surrounded by the fiercely loyal women of her family, Chloe finally felt safe. She touched her slightly rounded belly, making a silent promise to her unborn child. She would build a beautiful life for them, completely on her own. Months passed, and on a snowy December night, Lily was born. She had a tuft of dark hair and big, curious blue eyes. The moment they placed the tiny, crying infant on Chloe's chest, the last remnants of her broken heart stitched themselves back together. Lily became her entire universe. The sleepless nights, the endless diaper changes, the overwhelming exhaustion. It all felt like a privilege. Chloe threw herself into motherhood, determined to be everything Lily needed. But as Lily grew into an energetic toddler, the reality of providing for her set in. Chloe took a job as a receptionist at a local dental clinic to pay the bills. It was mind-numbing work. She sat behind a desk all day, answering phones and filing charts, while her true passion burned quietly inside her. Every evening, after Lily went to sleep, Chloe retreated to Aunt Martha's large kitchen. Baking became her therapy. She kneaded bread dough as if she were punching out her frustrations. She whisked sauces until her arms ached. She recreated Grandma Betty's recipes, adding her own modern twists. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon, roasted garlic, and resilience. One night, Aunt Martha watched her intricately decorate a cake and casually suggested she start a food blog. Chloe laughed it off initially, but the idea planted a deep root in her mind. Chloe bought a cheap ring light and started an anonymous food blog called The Dusty Apron. She posted videos of her hands working the dough, chopping fresh herbs, and sizzling meats in cast-iron skillets. She wrote heartfelt, emotional captions about how food heals the soul and connects us to our past. She did not show her face hiding behind her culinary creations. Slowly, the blog gained traction. People connected with her authentic, rustic approach to cooking. A video of her making Grandma Betty's signature blueberry pie went viral, garnering millions of views in a single week. Chloe was stunned. She started receiving small brand deals, enough to quit the dental clinic and focus entirely on her passion. She spent her days testing recipes, while Lily played on the kitchen floor with wooden spoons. She was happy, she was fulfilled, but deep down, she knew she wanted more. She did not just want to cook for the internet, she wanted the heat, the chaos, and the pressure of a real professional kitchen. She wanted to be a chef. Then one Tuesday morning, an email arrived that completely stopped her heart. It was from Eleanor Vance, the notoriously strict owner of a high-end, award-winning restaurant group in Chicago. Eleanor had been following her blog. She was offering Chloe a trial position in her flagship kitchen. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. The offer was a dream come true, but it came with an agonizing sacrifice. The grueling hours and intense pressure of a Chicago kitchen meant she could not take 3-year-old Lily with her immediately. Chloe sat at the kitchen table, tears streaming down her face, holding the printed email. Aunt Martha and Mother Sarah sat across from her. It was Sarah who finally spoke up, her voice firm and supportive. She told Chloe to go. She insisted that they would take care of Lily for the first 6 months while Chloe established herself in the city. "You have to build a kingdom for her," Sarah said softly. Breaking down, Chloe agreed. The goodbye at the airport was gut-wrenching. She held Lily tightly, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo, promising she would be back soon. Chloe arrived in Chicago with a single suitcase and a heart full of terrifying ambition. She walked into Eleanor Vance's flagship restaurant, a massive, gleaming cathedral of culinary perfection. The heat of the kitchen was physical, the noise deafening. Pans clattered, flames roared, and the head chef, a towering man named Marcus, barked orders with military precision. Marcus took one look at Chloe, scoffed at her lack of formal training, and pointed her to the prep station. She was starting at the very bottom, but Chloe tied her apron tight. She was ready for war. The first few months were brutal. Chloe worked 14-hour shifts, peeling mountains of potatoes, butchering fish, and scrubbing greasy floors until her hands bled. Marcus pushed her relentlessly, testing her breaking point every single night. The stress was unimaginable. She survived on espresso and sheer willpower. But Chloe never broke. Her rustic instincts blended perfectly with the high-end techniques she absorbed by watching the line cooks. Slowly, she earned Marcus's respect. When a sous chef quit mid-shift during a chaotic Friday dinner service, Chloe stepped up to the hotline without being asked. She cooked with a fierce, fluid grace, pushing out flawless plates of seared scallops and braised short ribs. By the end of the night, Marcus nodded at her. She was officially on the line. The intense physical labour and the scorching heat of the kitchen caused the last of Chloe's lingering insecurities to melt away. She lost weight naturally, her body hardening into lean muscle. She bought a sleek modern wardrobe. She looked in the mirror and finally saw a strong, capable, beautiful woman staring back. She was no longer the insecure girl who ran away in the rain. She was Chef Chloe. After 8 months of relentless grind, she finally secured a beautiful apartment near the restaurant. It was time to bring her daughter home. The reunion at the airport was a scene out of a movie. Lily, a little older and running fast, launched herself into Chloe's arms. Chloe buried her face in her daughter's neck, crying tears of absolute joy. Life in Chicago finally clicked into place. She hired a wonderful nanny to watch Lily during the evening service, and she spent her mornings taking Lily to the park, reading books, and baking simple treats together. At the restaurant, Chloe's rise was meteoric. Eleanor Vance personally tasted a new menu item Chloe had developed, a sophisticated, deconstructed version of Grandma Betty's buttermilk biscuits, and immediately promoted her to assistant executive chef. Chloe was thriving. Her career was soaring, her daughter was happy, and her heart was securely locked away. She had not thought about Julian in years. She believed that chapter of her life was permanently closed, buried beneath layers of professional success and maternal devotion. But the universe has a funny way of bringing the past back when you least expect it. It was a bustling Saturday night. The restaurant was completely booked. The waitstaff buzzed nervously. A very important table had requested to speak to the chef responsible for their meal. Marcus nudged Chloe. "They specifically loved your braised lamb," he said. "Go out there and take the compliment." Wiping her hands on a towel, Chloe stepped out into the elegant, dimly lit dining room. Chloe navigated through the sea of white tablecloths and clinking crystal glasses, a professional, confident smile plastered on her face. The waiter pointed to a corner booth, illuminated by a soft chandelier. As Chloe approached, the breath was completely knocked out of her lungs. Sitting at the table, older but instantly recognisable, were Richard and Eleanor Vanderbilt, Julian's parents. They were laughing quietly over their empty plates. Chloe froze mid-step, her heart hammering it against her ribs. She wanted to turn and run back into the safety of the kitchen, but the confident chef she had become refused to flee. She took a deep breath, straightened her white coat and stepped forward. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady and calm. "I heard you enjoyed the lamb." Eleanor Vanderbilt looked up, her polite smile turning into a mask of pure shock. Richard dropped his napkin. They stared at the beautiful, commanding woman standing before them. "Audrey!" Eleanor gasped, using the fake name she still remembered. "No," Chloe replied softly, the truth finally slipping out. "My name is Chloe. It has been a long time." The silence that stretched between them was heavy with unspoken memories. Chloe maintained her professional composure, thanked them for dining, and turned to walk away. But Richard stood up quickly, his voice urgent. "Chloe, wait. Please, we need to talk to you." Chloe reluctantly agreed to meet them outside by the alley exit after her shift. The cool Chicago night air offered little comfort against the burning anxiety in her chest. Richard and Eleanor stood under a flickering streetlight, looking far more vulnerable than she remembered. Without hesitation, Richard launched into a desperate explanation. He revealed that he had hired a private investigator years ago and discovered the truth about the car crash. He knew the real Audrey was driving. He knew she had framed Julian. And he knew that the day Chloe ran away, the real Audrey had ambushed the apartment while Julian was stuck at a sudden work emergency. Julian had never invited her. He had come home to find the apartment ruined, Audrey smug, and Chloe completely gone. Julian had thrown Audrey out onto the street, threatening to have her arrested. He had spent the next 2 years frantically searching for Chloe, hiring detectives to comb the city, but she had vanished without a trace. Chloe stood frozen in the alley, her world tilting on its axis. The betrayal she had carried for years was a lie. Julian had never stopped loving her. Tears pricked her eyes as the crushing weight of the misunderstanding crashed over her. Eleanor stepped forward, gently taking Chloe's trembling hands. "He still looks for you," she whispered. "He is completely alone." Chloe's mind was a chaotic whirlwind as she rode the taxi back to her apartment. The neon city lights blurred past her window. Julian had been innocent. The pain, the flight, the years of hiding, it was all based on a cruel manipulation by a toxic ex. Her heart ached for the man she had left behind, but an even greater fear gripped her. What would he do when he found out about Lily, a child he never knew existed? She paid the driver and hurried up to her apartment floor. The hallway was quiet. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, tossing her keys onto the console table. Her nanny, Mrs. Gable, stepped out of the living room, looking slightly nervous. "Chloe, I am so sorry," the nanny whispered. "A gentleman arrived an hour ago. He said he was an old friend. He looked so desperate. And Lily, well, Lily just took to him immediately. They are in the living room." Chloe's blood ran cold, then incredibly hot. She dropped her purse. She walked slowly down the hallway, the sound of her daughter's giggles floating through the air. She stopped at the doorway of the living room, gripping the frame to keep from collapsing. There, sitting on the plush carpet, building a block tower with 4-year-old Lily, was Julian. He was not in a wheelchair. He was sitting cross-legged, perfectly healthy, his dark hair slightly messy. Julian looked up. His hands froze mid-air, a wooden block slipping from his fingers. He stared at Chloe, his eyes rapidly filling with tears. He stood up slowly, proving that the miracle of his recovery was complete. He was tall, broad, and looking at her with a love so desperate it shattered every wall she had built. "Chloe," he choked out, his voice cracking. Lily looked up, oblivious to the emotional earthquake happening in the room. "Mommy! The tall man brought a teddy bear," she cheered, pointing to a massive plush toy on the sofa. Julian's eyes darted from Chloe to Lily, the realization hitting him with the force of a freight train. He saw the familiar blue eyes, the dark hair. He stumbled back a step, covering his mouth. She is mine," he whispered, the tears finally spilling over. Chloe nodded slowly, crying freely now. She crossed the room in 3 rapid strides. Julian caught her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist, lifting her off her feet. He buried his face in her neck, sobbing uncontrollably, apologizing over and over for the pain, for the misunderstanding, for the lost years. Chloe held him tightly, her fingers gripping his shirt. "It wasn't your fault," she cried. "I'm so sorry I ran." They collapsed onto the sofa, holding each other as Lily watched with wide, curious eyes. The broken pieces of their family were finally in one room. The following year was a beautiful, chaotic blur of healing and rebuilding. Julian and Chloe were married in a quiet, intimate ceremony by the lake. Julian legally adopted Lily, completely embracing his role as a devoted father. They bought a beautiful townhouse in the suburbs, filling it with laughter, toys, and the constant smell of Chloe's baking. But life still had one final twist. Eleanor Vance, the tough, uncompromising restaurant owner, called Chloe into her office on a gloomy Tuesday morning. Eleanor looked frail. Her usual sharp posture stooped. She poured 2 glasses of expensive whiskey and slid one toward Chloe. With a calm, unwavering voice, Eleanor revealed that her cancer had returned, and it was terminal. She had months to live. Chloe wept, holding the hands of the woman who had given her a chance when she had nothing. Eleanor smiled weakly. "I have no heirs, Chloe. My empire is yours. You are the executive chef, and upon my passing, you will be the sole owner of the Vance Restaurant Group. Do not let my kitchens lose their fire." A few months later, Eleanor passed away peacefully. Chloe stood at the helm of a massive culinary empire. She was a CEO, a mother, and a beloved wife. She had conquered the city that had once nearly destroyed her. But despite her immense success, she felt a pulling in her soul. She needed to go back to the beginning. The autumn leaves swirled around the tyres of Julian's SUV as they pulled onto a familiar dirt road deep in rural Indiana. Chloe stepped out of the car, the crisp wind whipping her hair, her breath caught in her throat. Before her stood Grandma Betty's old farmhouse. It was weathered and peeling, but the majestic oak tree still stood tall, its golden canopy casting a protective, sprawling shadow over the untamed yard. Lily ran ahead, her boots crunching loudly on the fallen leaves, her laughter echoing into the sky. Julian wrapped his arms around Chloe from behind, resting his chin comfortably on her shoulder. He kissed her cheek and whispered that he had tracked down the current owners and bought the entire property a month ago. It was her home again. Aunt Martha and Mother Sarah pulled up moments later, carrying heavy picnic baskets filled with food. They set up a long wooden table right under the old oak tree, exactly like the days of her childhood. Chloe brought out a steaming platter of her famous blueberry pancakes, their crispy edges glistening in the sunlight, the sweet aroma of maple syrup filling the breeze. As they sat together, eating and sharing loud stories, Chloe listened to the wind rustling the golden leaves above. The old tree seemed to whisper of resilience, of surviving the bitter, freezing winters, only to bloom brighter in the spring. Chloe leaned back against Julian's chest, watching her beautiful daughter chase falling leaves across the grass. She had lost her way completely, navigated through heartbreak and betrayal, and built an empire from her own pain. Now, sitting under the tree of her childhood, she realized that every tear and every struggle had led her exactly to where she belonged. The circle of life was beautifully, perfectly complete. Thank you so much for experiencing Chloe's journey with us. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more cinematic tales, and leave a comment below. What would you have done if you were in Chloe's shoes that rainy night? Tell us your thoughts.